Hello, everyone, and welcome to our discussion, Education at the Last Mile, ensuring access to maximise potential. My name is Jenny Albone. I'm a consultant with the Education Global Practice at the World Bank, and I'm here to moderate our session today. I hope that everybody is able to see me and hear me okay, because for the next 25 minutes, we have a wonderful opportunity to hear from two leaders who are working to build resilient, equitable opportunities for children to experience a quality education. And it's such a timely conversation. Even before this pandemic, we were facing a global learning crisis, which left over half of children in low and middle income countries unable to read a simple text, and where many children already lacked access to schooling and critical learning resources. Extended school closures around the world mean that learning poverty is higher, inequality is higher, and the progress that's been made on a number of fronts has been put at risk. And for girls specifically, we know that the pandemic has compounded the challenges and barriers that they face to realise their full potential. Over 129 million girls were out of school worldwide before the pandemic, and they were less likely to complete secondary school than the boys in their class. All of that has significant consequences, and building forward means ensuring that all children, especially the most marginalised, can access a quality education and experience continuity of learning between home and school. So with that, I'm delighted to introduce our expert speakers today to share more on their response and their priorities and recommendations for education. I'm joined by Alice ALBRIGHT, who is the Chief Executive Officer for the Global Partnership for Education. Since joining in 2013 as its first Chief Executive, she's strengthened its position as a major delivery agency of the Sustainable Development Goals agenda, working to provide quality education globally to children in lower income countries. Joining her in conversation is MURIMIRWA, the Executive Director in Africa for CAMFED, the Campaign for Female Education, which partners with schools, communities, and education authorities to tackle the many barriers that can hold back girls from realising their full potential. So I'm going to start today's discussion by putting three questions to Angie and Alice. Please use the chat and Q&A box to add your comments, your reactions and questions. I'm really aware that we have very little time this afternoon, so I'm going to hopefully leave time at the end for a couple of questions and take a few from those who are attending. So with that, I'd like to kick off our conversation with a question to you, Alice, on how your work at the Global Partnership for Education has responded to some of the challenges that COVID has presented for education.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me to be with you all. It's a great pleasure to be with both of you, and of course here virtually at the Global Philanthropy Forum. Angie, your work is terrific, and Jennifer, it's great to be with you as well. And I often think back to some of the early days of GPF with Jane Wales, and what a wonderful organization and network it's become. So it's wonderful to be back with you all again. Let me take us back to March 2020 to set the scene. And this was sort of 2 weeks into the pandemic. WHO had just declared it a global pandemic. Already at the time, hundreds of millions of learners around the world were at home because their schools had closed very suddenly. Little was known about the virus at the time, and there was absolutely no sense of the scale and the extent and the scope of the crisis that was to unfold. And we need to never forget that schools' doors were amongst the first to close, and in many cases, the last to reopen. So even though the pandemic was at one level and remains a health crisis, it is absolutely problem 1A is that it is an education crisis. GPE, my organization, just as an aside, is the largest fund globally that is solely dedicated to funding and transforming education in developing countries. So in many ways, we are at the front line of the impacts of the pandemic. So with a situation where 1.6 billion kids were suddenly not at school, this became a crisis, like a crisis that nobody had ever seen before. But yet, this was the kind of crisis that we were facing. So my staff was all grounded, and everybody was trying to figure out how to best quickly support our partner countries. So within literally a couple of weeks, we first deployed $250 million of grant funding by repurposing some other monies into emergency education. Shortly after that, we upped the total to about $500 million. And since that, with that emergency money, have supported 355 million children across 66 countries to be able to continue their education through the pandemic. It was a time of incredible creativity and dedication. Partners came together, mounted plans, put all of their best efforts into figure out very practical solutions to be able to get children to be able to continue their education. And this ranged everything from no tech to low tech to high tech. All solutions were put on the table. Just to give you some ideas or some examples, there was a development of radio, TV, and online learning content in Rwanda and Senegal. In other countries, there was distribution of age-appropriate printed materials where connectivity was not an option for whatever reason. Timor-Leste is an example of that. And preparations for school beginning to reopen as that became possible. We saw that in Papua New Guinea and helped fund that. And so everywhere, we looked very specifically to figure out how to reach out to the most vulnerable populations. These are often girls or children with disabilities or from the poorest households, to make sure that no kid was left behind. But looking forward, we've got to remember that this is not over. COVID is not a thing of the past. It is a thing that we're going to have to deal with. Right now, we still see about 60 million children in the world that are still being affected by some form of school closures. I think we're only beginning to comprehend the devastating impact on learning, on mental health, on social and emotional welfare, all of which are critical to successful education. So education systems are going to need to continue to grapple with the impacts of the pandemic for a number of years to come. And it's critical that the entire community must all rise together to meet that challenge, because I think we're in a new world that is not going to go away, and not one that is going to revert back to what education was beforehand. So let me stop there and turn it over to you, Angie.
Thanks so much. And Alice and Jen, I'm so excited to be here and with both of you on this panel. I think, Alice, you covered most of the challenges that we encountered in education, and this also speaks to the work of CAMFED and the challenges that we've encountered. I think it's quite generous to say COVID has been brutal, because it was worse than that. It presented a huge challenge, as you know, Alice, to your point, that schools closed and economies were disrupted. It left children, especially girls already at the margins of society, even more vulnerable. We all know that COVID-19 also laid bare huge inequalities that are there, particularly in education. And with those who are already at the margins being left even further behind. In our work as CAMFED, we faced a lot of families that were struggling and are still struggling for basics. And this includes such things as food, adequate facilities, sanitary facilities, medical care. And they're at great risk. And for their daughters, we know that the risk of early marriage and adolescent pregnancy is compounded. The digital divide became real as education systems introduced online learning, where most could not either afford it nor access it. But throughout this evolving crisis, I just want to say, as an organization, as CAMFED, we have been fully focused on providing continuity of support to the girls and communities which need it the most. Our principal governing principle as an organization is accountability to the child, and particularly the most marginalized child within the system and within the communities that we work with. So our support remained fully focused on providing them with support. So when schools started to close in the face of the global pandemic, March 2020, it was fast and furious. But I just want to say that our long-established reporting systems and structures and connections meant that as an organization, we could take an agile approach. So our decentralized community-led infrastructure meant that we had and have more than 308,000 people on the ground across 162 districts. That's in Zimbabwe, Zambia, Ghana, Tanzania, and Malawi. And I must say, all of them also benefiting from the Global Partnership for Education, ALICE. And so a decentralized structure continued to reach out. They had the expertise and the access to respond to the crisis at the front line and ensuring that marginalized girls and communities are not overlooked. Our network of champions includes such people as the school district level authorities, teachers, parents, traditional leaders, and young women leaders in the CAMFED Association. Together, we identified families in need and worked with donor partners and to pivot funding to supply the basics. And such basics included essential supplies like soap, sanitizers. That was the first time communities had heard about even that the use of that word sanitizer. Issues around medicines, sanitary pads, sewing of face masks. Community members stepped up, and I need to applaud them. They provided food to vulnerable children, alerting authorities to potential cases of abuse or child marriage, and particularly they're also targeting children that already had attendance concerns. They also were very conscious that going hungry significantly increased girls' vulnerability to exploitative relationships and with it adolescent pregnancies. We also supported learner guides to quickly pivot their outreach to students at home, acutely aware that of the additional threats to girls' well-being, especially the threat of child marriage. So learner guides are young women, high school graduates from our program that return to their former schools to support learners to thrive. We looked at new and innovative ways for the learner guides to deliver the My Better World curriculums and life skills curriculum to keep families engaged around the welfare of their children while supporting girls to stay safe and hopeful. We had to deal with a lot of COVID myths that we had to dispel, and it helped that learner guides were, young women that had gone to school and could decode information that was coming on multiple forums, be it from World Health Organization. And I like, Alice, that you talked about learning and how learning continued, such issues as using hard copy printouts, where online learning was not an option, WhatsApp, radios, where they were available. And these are the same channels that were used to deliver messages. So I just want to say that as a result, when schools started reopening, between 94 and 99% of the girls we support returned to school. This was 20% above national return rates in Malawi, for example. It would also not be right to not pay tribute where it is also due. And I do this on behalf of the girls on the continent and those in roles similar to mine. I want to thank all those donors, funders, philanthropists who met their grantees halfway or all the way as they pivoted and responded and repurposed resources to the impact of COVID at the front line. It made some serious difference for us too. ALICE, the Global Partnership for Education's accelerated grants provided a critical lifeline across all the countries we work. And I'm proud to say that as an organization working in such countries, we also added our voice to how the resources could be deployed equitably and agently, speaking to the realities of the digital divide from availability, affordability, and accessibility to gender issues magnified by the crisis, to the urban-rural divide, and so on. So the pandemic has been brutal, I must say, but we've responded with agility, agency, and empathy. And as we build forward, we cannot afford to rest on our laurels. We cannot allow the COVID-19 crisis to roll back the gains that have been made in closing the gender gap in education. So I'll end there, Jen, for now.
Thank you both. I think that it frames so well but both the magnitude of the crisis, the speed at which it happened, and the need to respond quickly. But also there are some great examples that you've highlighted there about some of the practical solutions and considerations and creativity that was brought forward by the speed of that response. I wanted to move on and talk a bit about girls' education, because both of you have highlighted that there are some multiple vulnerabilities facing girls that this crisis has only highlighted and exacerbated. Angie, could you tell me a bit more about what your priorities for girls' education in your role at CAMFED are now in light of that?
huge ambitions for girls' education, and so does the organization, and I believe Alice as well for Global Partnership for Education, because I could see, like the mobilization efforts and everything. But I just want to say that at CAMFED, we view girls' education as an entry point. We know that girls' education is the basis for female representation and leadership in all walks of life. And we know that, and it's beautiful that we're all on this platform today, right? That it's inextricably linked with social justice, economic justice, climate action. So for us as an organization, we see education as an entry point, like girls' education as an entry point, whereby the young women we have been supported through school in turn capitalize on their education and step up as leaders of change in their communities, countries, and across Africa. I'm proud to say that I'm actually one of the very first girls to benefit from CAMFED. So that speaks for itself as well. So I'm really proud that I've got this opportunity to be able to pay it forward in this way. I also just want to say that as CAMFED, we are also attuned to the fact that education systems, like the communities and countries that host them, are inequitable. There are serious exclusion challenges, especially for the most marginalized girls. This includes exclusion from school, which we see in the number of out-of-school children, and exclusion within school itself that manifests as poor attendance, poor completion rates, and poor learning experience, particularly for girls. So CAMFED prioritizes reaching the most marginalized girls to go to school. And I just want to say it is on this revolutionary model that our current priorities are set. So our current priorities include, even in the context of COVID, ensuring that, number one, ensuring that girls from the most disadvantaged girl backgrounds have the support they need to attend and complete primary and secondary school. These supports include both financial and social support. Secondly, it's creating formal pathways for young women to transition out of and beyond school. This is through expanding women's business opportunities, creating jobs, and increasing income. A lot of young women and girls are graduating into an abyss, into communities and contexts that are not prepared for that influx of young women that are graduating, because traditionally, women have not gone that far. So we know that an educated woman will invest in a children's education and support their studies. From our work as CAMFED, on average, every young woman we've supported through school supports an average another 3 girls through school. So one of our priorities is creating such formal pathways for that transition into secure livelihoods. And finally, it's collaborating at every level in common cause to bring excluded children back into the education system, dismantling the social and financial obstacles to girls' education and women's inclusion. That's creating a system that works for every child, regardless of where they were born or to whom they were born to. So just some very specifics. By the end of 2025, as the Campaign for Female Education is CAMFED, our audacious goals include to have supported 5 million more girls to learn and thrive in school, to have supported 280,000 women on a secure pathway to further education, entrepreneurship, and employment, and to have supported women-owned business, like the young women that we support to run their businesses, to create another 150,000 jobs. And our aim is that each of the CAMFED Association members, who is on average supporting 3 children now, would be in a position to support at least 5 more, such a multiply and sustainable way to support the next generation. Thanks, Jen.
Thank you, Angie, and I really appreciate the way that you've set out the sort of multiple barriers that go well beyond just getting girls into school. The fact that support at key transition points, and particularly into labour force participation, can so often be some of the barriers that hold them back from realising their full potential. Alice, what do sort of the priorities for supporting girls' education look like from the work that you're doing at the Global Partnership for Education?
Well, thank you again for the question. And I think Angie's made some wonderful points. And I think I really want to acknowledge CAMFED's tireless work on the ground for girls' education. Their organization has a fantastic and very successful business model. Where we come in is at a bit more of a global and systemic level. Zooming out, I think that if you look across the board at the data, I think we do have to acknowledge, on the one hand, that there has been huge progress for girls in recent decades. But in our view, while there has been progress, the progress is still too slow and it is too fragmented. So in a way, we need to press what we call the reset button. When we look at where the overall gender equality agenda is, and that's mostly about girls, it will take, we estimate, another 100 years to reach gender equality. And education is one of the, at the heart of that agenda. And we know, though, that we cannot wait over 100 years for girls to reach the same level of access to a quality education that boys have. It has to happen now. So when we look, for example, at countries like Chad, we see that girls face extreme disadvantages. There, 1 in 8 women only can read and write. And when you think about those kinds of numbers, we know that we cannot wait any longer. Change has to happen now. So what do we need to do? We need to put additional transformative efforts into girls' education. When we look at our priorities at GPE, first, we need to help work with countries to urgently address some of the barriers to girls' education. These are things like too much distance between schools, poor infrastructure, meaning not enough toilets and hygiene facilities, safety, social norms, violence, earlier forced child marriage, chronic poverty. There are a number of barriers that get in the way of girls going and staying in school. And then, of course, there's keeping girls in school once they do start school. And often what happens is the girls drop out, they don't learn as much, and they don't finish school. So it is an enormously complex problem and challenge that has to do not only with the quality of what girls are learning in school, but also some of the issues surrounding education and going to school that also keep girls out of school. All of this is why just recently we set up what we call our Girls Education Accelerator. It is one of many steps that GPE has taken over its past number of years to really focus on girls' education. We're very committed to it. It's the heart of our current strategy. Our Girls Education Accelerator is a multi-partner funding mechanism that we've now endowed with $250 million in support of girls' education in the countries where progress lags the furthest behind. So this is an instrument that will act as a transformative type of instrument and provide transformative investment. We're at the early pilot phase of it. We're very excited that some key philanthropic organizations are supporting it. This includes the Open Societies Foundation, Dubai Cares, the Lego Foundation. We believe that working collectively in partnership with country governments and with philanthropies and others, anybody, will help secure the political and financial wherewithal to really begin to get gender responsiveness more firmly into education delivery at the country level. It's also very consistent with our role as a global fund to convene and champion this critical agenda. So it's very much at the heart of our work. We're putting a lot of money and muscle behind it. And I think that the thing that people need to remember is this 100-year gap. And we're not going to make progress across so many issues within the overall development agenda if we have girls lagging a century behind in terms of their access to gender equality in general, but education in particular, because it gives rise to so many other good things that girls need in their life. So let me stop there.
The need to press reset, I think, has never been so urgent. And before we move on, I just wanted to address one of the questions that have come through from participants in the session, from Margaret Ann Cargill, Philanthropies, and Bishop Chain, on the role and rights of women have a significant impact on the priority for education in girls and young women. And the question is about, how does that kind of big change occur? And following from what you were both saying, are there any examples that you can give of how that systemic change about women's roles, rights, and education priorities are starting to happen as part of that reset?
Well, I can certainly share some thoughts on that. The sort of how do you push reset and how do you make it happen? First of all, I think it has to happen at all levels, at country level, regional level, global level. much depth and much breadth on that one. And that's because we need change both at the delivery end of the equation, but also at the advocacy and global priority setting end of the equation. And we have to realize that this is going to take relentless focus. Last year was Beijing plus 25, but the Generation Equality event in Paris at the end of June, it was really Beijing plus 26 because of the pandemic, was an incredible event. But there was also a question that it raised in my mind, which is, why are we still talking about the importance of gender equality 25 years after Beijing, when we said it was a crisis? And so it's still a crisis, and we have to lean into this 100-year gap. And I think that everybody who's involved in these matters knows that we're not going to make the progress that we need to make in development in general if we persist in a world with such deep inequity between girls and boys. And Angeline and all your friends at CAMFED certainly know that. So we have to come at it in terms of money, in terms of delivery, in terms of advocacy, in terms of leaning into data availability, and everything that goes into the toolkit. And there are some success stories that we can look at. I mean, some of the countries that we work with have begun to reverse laws that prevented pregnant girls from going back to school. And we need to do everything we can to really understand what gave rise to those moments and encourage working with partners across the globe to have more and more of those success stories. But if we all lean into it, we can make some progress here. But it's the hidden problem, and we're not going to make progress in the overall development agenda unless we tackle this issue of gender inequality.
Yeah, and if I could also just come in there, and Alice, you covered all the key essentials there. And I just want to be able to say that, particularly, I think as we all do this, it's also making this problem less hidden. It needs to be public that there is a challenge, there is a problem, and to own it up. But also just like the critical point that particularly the GPE stands on this with regards to financing and ensuring that there is explicit resources that are going towards girls' education, because we need to all embrace and accept the fact that today's girls are tomorrow's sumo leaders. And unless their right to education is respected and protected, then we are not getting anywhere closer to this. And if 100 years is not a crisis message there, then I don't know what else we need to be able to trace there. But I just want to be able to say that I think we need to keep it in mind that this all needs to start from girls' education, from investing in the education of women, because we need women in education, in health, in politics, in law, and in business. And all of that is based on education. And we need to ring fence resources for girls' education without fail.
Thank you. And I'm looking at the clock run down on this conversation, and I feel like we're only starting to touch on, just some of the things and on multiple fronts that we need to consider as we move forward. But, where we've landed is, resource mobilization and investment and support. And thinking about that, Alice and Angie, what three things would you urge the philanthropic community to focus on at all levels as we move forward from the pandemic? Alice, if we start with you.
Let me just make sure my mic is on. Yes. Okay. So my three things are think education, think big, and think and work together. And let me tell you just a bit about what I mean about this. In terms of think education, we have a huge disconnect. I think everybody would agree that education is important, and it's one of the smartest investments any country can make in its future and prosperity and so forth. If you look at the amount of money that is going into education, whether or not it's globally or on a consistent basis from domestic resources, the financial commitments, particularly in the international side, simply don't add up. And we need leading philanthropists to champion the cause of education and create a seismic moment, much the way the Gates Foundation did through its incredible philanthropy in health now a number of decades ago. we need somebody to come in and have the same seismic impact on education that the Gates Foundation did. In terms of think big, this is about transformation. We cannot live in a world where there's such big 100-year gaps. And I'm not talking about one group of schools or one country. It's thinking about changing how an entire ecosystem around education functions. This means the financing, the workforce, the data, the evidence, the political will, and realizing that this is a sector that you cannot take for granted. It needs all of these different forms of support, and thinking about how can you transform how education systems, which are all the different pieces, work to deliver better. And then the final one is about working together. And this is not just about that it is sort of a good thing to do with working with partners. It certainly is. It's about working at scale. And we don't live in a world any longer where different organizations, different countries, different parts of the world cannot afford to work together because there's simply not enough money. So we need to work together at scale to figure out what the problems are, what the solutions are, and get all behind a vision of what better education demands. But we have to begin to scale the solutions. And this concept of scaling the solutions and then delivering them globally is very much what GPE is about. So think big, think education, and think and work at scale together.
Thank you, Alice. And I'm looking at the time running down on our session, but before we wrap it up, Angie, is there anything that you would add to that and urge the philanthropic community to consider as we press reset?
I would put a megaphone on everything that Alice spoke about to say, yes, please put it on loud, repeat, repeat, repeat. I also just want to add a particular point, I think, related to issues around women's leadership. I think it's important for us to invest as well in programs that are laid by those who have experienced the problem that we are trying to address. I think there are cultural dimensions, there are issues that are rooted in communities that we need to continue to dismantle, and it helps to be able to work with those that are at the front line, those that have experienced vulnerability and marginality, and can be able to speed up the action. And I'm just saying this because it will make a huge difference to how far, how deep, and how long every dollar or a euro or a pound goes to be able to ensure that we listen to what's the reality, the lived experience of most people. And I also just want to say, as we think big and think scale, let us invest in reaching the most marginalized. From my experience as an organization, we have discovered that, if you target the most marginalized, the system works for everybody. And to Alice's point, we cannot in right conscience ask them to wait any longer. So by targeting them, everyone benefits. And of course, my last point that I said about earlier, let's embrace the perspective that today's girls are tomorrow's female leaders. And we need to start investing in them today if tomorrow is going to be brighter. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing the many examples of the work that you're doing at a systems level, at a country level, and stopping at a point where we're thinking about our future leaders and the investment that we need to make in them. I think is a perfect point. That concludes our session. Angie and Alice, thank you so much for joining us. That also concludes day one of the conference. I hope that many people will be back at 8 a.m. Pacific time tomorrow. But for now, thank you for joining us and enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.